So just to briefly introduce myself, I am Teresa Schell from Chemsec and I'm head of policy. So I head up our policy work. So to briefly introduce our organization so that you understand what we do and why we do what we do. So we are an environmental NGO with the aim to reduce the use of hazardous substances, especially in products. So we do this by collaborating with companies and investors, looking at their situation and finding solutions that are beneficial for human health and the environment, but also working for companies. So we bring this information to policymakers to try to influence the regulation, because this is where we see it has the biggest effect on achieving our goals. It's important to state that we don't take money from companies or investors, but we are funded by governments and charity organizations, foundations, so that we can be completely impartial in what we say. So we provide a number of online tools that are more known than the organization itself. And they are more known and they are also free of charge. So you can all go in and have a look and use the information as much as you like. Our oldest and most known tool is the SIN list. So this is a list of substances, of chemicals that fulfill the criteria in the REACH regulation in Europe to be what is called a substance of very high concern. So the worst of the worst chemicals. It's used by companies to stay ahead of regulation, to have an idea of what will be regulated in the future so that you can move before and rather than after. So the SIN list is used to build the other tools. We use the information in the SIN list to provide a number of different tools. One is called the marketplace, where we provide solutions to the uses of the SIN list substances. So we don't only talk about the problems, but also the solutions. We also have a PFAS guide where we have information about the PFAS restriction work, but also hands-on information for companies wanting to phase out PFAS. So when we collaborate with companies, we collaborate with a number of different companies, but at the core is the Chemsec Business Group. They are all aiming to be front runners in chemicals management, and I think you recognize at least a few of them. So I am personally in the green chemistry advisory boards of both Lego and Apple. We also collaborate with a number of investors around the world, and I see that the numbers are old. We have even more investors today with assets under management that are actually $18 trillion asset under management. It's no longer 11. Sorry about that. And they care about chemicals in general, but about PFAS in particular. So talking more about the PFAS problem and the scale of it. There has been an investigation of European journalists putting together the current information about PFAS contamination in Europe. And as you can see, the problem is very big, but what you see is also only the tip of the iceberg. Many of the areas where you do not see hotspots of PFAS is because they simply haven't measured it. And of course, it is not only Europe that has the situation. you will be able to have similar maps of the rest of the world. So when we have this contamination, the problem is that it won't go away because of PFAS persistency. You can remediate, you can clean certain volumes of water or soil, but you cannot clean the rainwater, you cannot clean the air, you cannot clean the whole earth. And there is, of course, a lot of human suffering involved, but there's also hard costs for society when it comes to this contamination, both when it comes to cleaning water, but also medical costs and so forth. And this situation is the reason behind that 5 countries have submitted the PFAS restriction proposal. They are concerned about their citizen and their countries. So I want to talk a bit about the scale of the problem. The thing is, we find PFAS in an extreme variety of different uses, but also in the production of things. And the use and emissions are also expected to be increasing dramatically until 2050. The problem with PFAS being so persistent is that whenever we use PFAS, it will eventually end up as emissions. And you may wonder why the use and the emissions are so different. Does PFAS disappear somewhere? And the answer is, of course, no, it doesn't disappear. But the calculations are made by economists. And economists only calculate 30 years. This is the problem. But PFAS doesn't care about 30 years, and it will continue to be emitted for eternity if you place it on the market. So this is why looking at the use and emissions can show a picture that is not correct. But the PFAS restriction is based on emissions. Yes, so talking about what the restriction is, the intention is to include all uses and all 10,000 different types of PFAS. But as was already mentioned today, there is also an opportunity to get a derogation from the restriction if there are no alternatives available. This is very important to think about because it's not that we ban everything we want to ban, but it's really about banning the uses where there are alternatives available. So the definition of what to be included when it comes to the PFAS structure is based on the OECD definition, and it's widely recognized, and it is very comprehensive and clear. The reason for this is because we saw years ago that when PFAS was phased out, the specific uses, they were just replaced by another PFAS. So this is the ultimate example of regrettable substitution. This is why it is so extremely important to regulate PFAS as a group. So the justification for the restriction is based on that this group is extremely persistent. So this means that any emissions that we have is just placed on top of each other and doesn't ever disappear. So this, in combination with the large emissions and the enormous uses, creates the urgency of addressing this problem. So the timing, where we are, if I can explain a little bit of the process here. We've already passed the time when the dossier was submitted and the public consultations were going on. And where we are right now is that the scientific committees are having their final talks. Actually, one is going on today to decide on their draft opinion. And we believe that the draft opinion will be released end of March next year. At that point, there will be a public consultation. And the idea is that information from this public consultation should be incorporated into the work and finally presented end of 2026. So this should be the basis that the Commission base their decision on. But what we see is that they do not wait for this, but they have already started the work within the Commission to see how to take a decision on the PFAS restriction. We do not know when they will have finished this work. The timeline is unclear, but it will take quite a lot of time, that's clear. Yeah, the situation has changed dramatically the last year due to the political landscape change. The reason is that we changed leadership in Europe based on the vote on the EU Parliament. The Parliament represents the European people, and they give the mandate to appoint the leader of the Commission. Before the elections, we had a quite green parliament, but this has shifted dramatically towards the conservative side and even the extreme right-wing side. This has changed the mandate that the leader of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has from a green focus to an industrial focus. So the president is the same, but the mandate is different. So the two guiding words of this commission is simplification and competitiveness. But if you check what it actually means, simplification has proved to be often a disguise for deregulation. And competitiveness has shown to be a very short-sighted push for helping chemical industry of parts of Europe. And the interests of these chemical producers are very often different to, for instance, brands and progressive companies. But the chemical industry has a very open door to the leadership of the Commission, and they are screaming very loudly that they really need financial help from the Commission. We see that the PFAS restriction is one of the hottest topics of all on the table, and it creates problems for this Commission because of the different types of wishes, of needs from different parties. So the impact on different industries is very big, but the problems connected to the PFAS contamination is also very big. So what we have seen is that the lobby activity around PFAS has been extremely high. And this, of course, has influenced the Commission. And as was mentioned already, we've had over 5,000 replies to the public consultation so far. The majority has been from Sweden, and I can explain why. It is based on a national NGO's activities to engage citizens. The second largest country to submit comments is Germany, and here we see it's predominantly the chemical industry. But Japan is surprisingly at third place here, which shows that Japanese industry is very interested and influenced by this restriction. So where we are right now is that the scientific committees are looking into details about all the different uses of PFAS, which is an incredible amount of work. So for many of these uses, it's not that difficult. And especially I'm talking about the consumer uses. We're talking about the frying pans, the coats, and so forth. That is not difficult. But for many uses, uncertainties remain still, and it will be very difficult for these committees to find conclusions for all of these uses. When it comes to what is included, it is still including fluoropolymers and, for instance, F-gases. These are important to mention because there has been a lot of discussion about these different topics. There has been some changes in the approach, and it happened in August this summer. So the European Chemicals Agency decided to omit a few, actually 8 different sectors due to lack of time. So the information about the uses and alternatives will be included in the draft opinion, but there will be no conclusion to guide the Commission on these 8 sectors. So among these categories, I would mention specifically sealing applications, which has a quite large use. We see that the Commission is struggling when it comes to giving guidance on where this will lead. At start, we heard politicians saying that they want to take action on consumer uses, but we were able to show that this is actually only an illusion of action because the use of PFAS in consumer uses is relatively small. So they now say that they want to start with banning the consumer uses and other relevant areas, but exactly what that is a bit unclear today. But the aim is still to ban all the uses of all PFAS because the problem is still going to be there. The question is how and when. And we also focus increasingly on talking about the uses rather than the emissions, as I already explained, that all uses will eventually become emissions. And just because the restriction proposal has the perspective of emissions doesn't mean that this is what should influence the politicians who are facing the big problems with contamination. So what we see now is that there is support from people and from politicians. And one example is that we now see several countries going ahead before the restriction, putting in place national bans. It's becoming politically difficult to not act on this matter as it influences and affects so many people. We also see that there is a lot of initiative coming from companies finding new solutions that can take us away from using PFAS. Since the PFAS dossier was placed on the table, we see an explosion in new alternatives being developed. And this is also in the more difficult uses like lithium-ion batteries. We also increasingly see activity from investors and also insurers that get into trouble because of PFAS and then do not want to be associated with it, with their money, with their insurances and so forth. We see, for instance, that insurers are adding a clause on force majeure, saying that they will not insure for PFAS contamination. So the conclusion is that very much is happening, and we see this transition being on its way. But we are currently being held back by the current political climate that fails to give this clear signal on where we are going. So I want to talk about the way forward for us in our work at Chemsec. So one thing that we see we need to do is to do myth busting, to showcase when there is disinformation out there. One example would be that industry would say that it's a blanket ban and that everything will be banned, which is clearly not true, as every use that has no alternative available will get a derogation. Another myth that is currently being brought up is that fluoropolymers would be of low concern, according to the OECD. This is not true, and the OECD has been clear about this. But the myth continues to be spread. One other thing that we focus a lot on is showing what is possible, to highlight where there are alternatives available today and in the near future. We also highlight areas where the need for development of alternative is big, because this creates market opportunities for companies to fill this void and thereby also gaining a lot of market share. Another important role for us is to keep talking about why we are doing this. Because even if the political landscape is putting forward the need of chemical industry, this doesn't reflect the situation we are in. And actually, when you look at the financial profits from the production of PFAS, it is very little. It's not a very profitable production to be in. And for policymakers, there is really no way around banning all the uses of PFAS, because if we do, we will only postpone the solutions of this problem, and in the process, we make the problem bigger. We see this, for instance, with investors. If we keep on polluting, very often investors will have to pick up the bill for these problems, and they will pay, but the problem will still remain. So this is not a solution. The only way to address this problem is to end the production and use, to turn off a tap. And for us in our work, it's very much about navigating the current political climate. This means to give the narrative that appeals to the current political leaders. For instance, when we're talking about simplification, the cutting of the scope of the PFAS process is not simplifying, it's making life much more complicated in the future. When it comes to competitiveness, the EU companies in general are at its most competitive when it comes to the green solutions, the toxic-free solutions. So this is really where the EU should go if we want to stay competitive in the long run. We also see the need to focus on the water quality because it's so important also for policymakers that we have clean water to drink, and we don't today. Another important aspect to bring forward is how PFAS affects fertility, for instance, that it actually decreases fertility, and we have a fertility problem also in the EU. So however we look at this, there needs to be action, and we need to phase out all the uses of all the PFAS in the future. And the earlier we do it, the better. So this finishes up my presentation. So I hope we have time for a lot of questions and answers.